So, been a while since I made a video. My name is Power Bounce for those who are just now watching this, and this is going to be my first ever reaction video, so please don't get angry at it. Now today, we are going to be watching something called the Ecology of Rathalos and Rathian from Monster Hunter by the channel Unnatural Science Channel. I highly recommend him. His channel will be linked in the description below. And let's see if we can learn. Also, after the end of this video, I'm going to give my thoughts on the character of the monsters themselves, and explain how Power Bounce would use them in his everyday life and stuff. Like how much would Power Bounce turn into him and stuff. So, without further ado, let's react to the video. Let's see if we learn something.
As you'd expect from the title, Capcom's Monster Hunter franchise is stuffed to the gills with all sorts of exotic beasts. But perhaps the most prevalent in the series run is Rathalos, the flagship of the first two games, the Fire Wyvern and the King of the Skies. The female of the species is known as a rathian, noticeable from their green colour and array of toxic quills. The two exhibit a number of interesting behaviours, and numerous questions can be asked from their behavioural ecology from these. Why are the different genders of the same species found in markedly different habitats? Why does Rathalos only tend to a single rathian despite clearly mating with several?
Whoa. It does that? Well, I thought I knew everything about Monster Hunter. Huh. I didn't know that. I thought that it was just one pair mated for life. Learned something new.
Does Rathalos deserve his title of King of the Skies, and why is Rathian grounded in comparison? Luckily, the Monster Hunter team's attitude to canon, or indeed giving much information at all, makes this franchise ripe for fan speculation and theorizing. And in this series, we'll be using the behavior and ecology of real-world animals to try and explore those of Monster Hunter. Or maybe it's the other way around. But let's begin. To start off, one question about Rathalos is his habit of seemingly mating with multiple Rathian, but only actually tending to one of them. Birds of prey are perhaps the best analogues for the main predatory wyverns in the series, and whilst many are monogamous, there is some variation. Harriers exhibit polygyny, which is the relationship of one male with multiple females. But even then, Rathalos doesn't exhibit true polygyny in the avian sense, in that Rathalos doesn't care for the multiple Rathian he mates with, only one. In birds, raising chicks alone is called monoparental care, and doesn't actually seem to occur in the actual brooding of the eggs phase, but only when the chicks have hatched does one adult desert the nest. There is one bird that does something somewhat similar, and it's the largest one alive today, the ostrich. After a spot of courtship, the male builds the female several nests, one of which she accepts and lays her clutch in. This is the major hen, and the one the male has some pair bond with. There are other females too who may have their own nests, but mainly lay in someone else's, that are known as minor hens. So the male does tend to these nests, but only really bonds with one female, seemingly like Rathalos. The reason for this odd mating concept among ostriches can be roughly summarized as a skewed sex ratio, coupled with a high abundance of predators but productive environments, leading to their major-minor breeding system. The latter points at least seem pretty fair for the environments the wyverns in this video feature in. Returning to Rathian and polygyny for a moment, whilst in other birds the male pair bonds with multiple females, this doesn't mean all of them have an easy time being looked after, because there's competition too among the females themselves. This correlates with information from the Monster Hunter World art book, that Rathians compete for a Rathalos as a mate. But why did this go so extreme that Rathian completely extirpate other females rather than just staggering their breeding? In certain seabirds, there's a phenomenon called Ashmole's halo, which is just a dramatic name for the decrease in prey items that occur around breeding seabird colonies, ultimately limiting their size, success, and season. In wyverns as large as Rathalos and Rathian, that for a breeding season would be forced to stay in one area with broods of hungry growing chicks to feed, plus the landscape of fear created by regular predation, it seems likely that this may occur. The hostility in Rathians to their own kind, to the point of extirpation, is likely an evolutionary response in dominant females to favour their own offspring. The distant ancestors of Rathalos were likely around the size of wingdrakes, and so probably did have bird-like polygyny that ultimately became the unique breeding system it is today through the resource requirements the wyverns needed as they grew into much larger top-order carnivores. So it seems the bizarre mating system is much more driven by Rathian than by Rathalos. Whilst we obviously have no evidence that Rathalos and Rathian have a similarly skewed sex ratio similar to ostriches, but it does seem like another good factor for their odd mating system. considering that without it there wouldn't really be much need for the Rathians to fight. There's still going to be better odds for a female for raising young without a male than by not mating at all, and for Rathalos it's still going to be beneficial for him to mate with as many females as possible, solely to hedge his bets that at least some of them in the other nests will survive, even if he's not the one looking after them. After all, in polygynous harriers, whilst each individual nest is less successful than monogamous ones, more of the chicks make it to adulthood overall for polygynous males. The reason monoparental care is so rare in birds is that they need to incubate their eggs, as wyverns may need to as well, which leads us to our next point in the habitat differences of rathalos and rathian. The ideal habitat for this species seems to be a mosaic of deciduous forest and broken hills or wetland, or the coastal forest and floodplain that makes up the bulk of their habitat in the New World. This is where the two are most frequently found in breeding pairs, and are the habitats that the two are most typically associated with. But rathian are also found in both dense tropical rainforest and arid deserts too. This is likely the need for high temperatures to keep eggs warm when she can't breed them herself.
That kind of makes sense for the egg thing. Because, I remember watching this series called Prehistoric Park, if you guys remember that. First of all, if you remember that, God bless you guys. Second, I remember something about the titanosaurs actually using the volcanic thermal radiation, the thermal sense from the volcano that came nearby to help heat their eggs up. So their eggs being warmed up by the volcano, so that way they didn't have to take care of them. So in a warm tropical environment, or in a warm, humid, warm, dry one with the deserts, that would make sense. Because in a way, the desert sand can be a natural temperature regulator. The sun warms the top of the sand, but also if you don't want your eggs getting too overwarmed up or too cooked, basically the underneath the sand is much cooler than the top of the sand, which would make sense if you want to try and raise a brood of equal ratio gender chicks. But then again, that is just speculation with Monster Hunter World. It could be something else entirely.
Volcanic regions, the ground is conferred to be too hot due to the close proximity to magma, and in higher altitudes and latitudes it'll be the opposite, and be too cold. But for an unlucky Rathian without a mate, which is the better option? Let's analyse the habitats and take a look. Starting with the rainforest, one thing that stands out about modern habitats is the lack of large predators in them. Indeed, in Monster Hunter as well, there may be animals like Clavinus, Deviljho and Zinogre that roam in and out of dense rainforests, but the only real resident large carnivore is Naga Cougar. The reason for this is that whilst amazingly biodiverse, rainforests aren't productive in the way more open habitats are. Most of the plant life is toxic, difficult to digest, or low in nutrients on the ground level, with the bulk of the good food being in the canopy layer. Hence why primates like Congalala or Quechahuacha are frequent, as they can actually access it. The rich leaf litter also supports a vast variety of invertebrates, some large enough to support good numbers of bird wyverns like Yankutku, and coupled with fallen fruit and fungi, good numbers of suids like mosswine and bullfango. These in turn support good packs of raptorial bird wyverns like Velocodrome and Iodrome, but very little Aptonoth or the large herbivores Rathian would be dependent on. Whilst they're present in small groups, it's nothing like the massive herds the open plains support. The rest of the animals mentioned can certainly make up part of the diet, but with sharp senses and arboreal abilities, they'd likely be too hard to regularly catch, especially as the thick rainforest vegetation would make ambush difficult from the ground. This is also likely the reason Rathalos never comes to such thick areas like dense rainforests, as it's impossible to fly in the dense canopies and the visibility is low from above. This is a double-edged sword though, with little to attract large predators. For a Rathian that's either successful enough at hunting atypical prey or manages to get enough large herbivores, it should be able to raise a pretty safe brood of chicks here. Desert regions aren't too dissimilar in that the lack of biomass reduces carnivore densities, but there's a definite argument it's a more dangerous place to rear a brood. Seregios seem to favour arid areas, and as I'll explore in a later video, they may well be the most important nest predator of Rathian. Tigrex also seem to frequent arid areas as they follow Apsaros herds, and either of the Bloss wyverns are belligerent enough to attack Rathian without actually being carnivorous. Clavinus and Deviljho also occur here semi-regularly, with the former possibly even being resident. It's hard to say if it has more or less large herbivores than the rainforest, but only likely marginally, and mainly focused around water sources too, so overall it seems to have the cons of the rainforest with none of the pros. Considering a lot of areas like the forest and hills near Kotoko seem to be close to deserts and other arid areas, there may be little reason for rathian to nest in deserts other than they purely don't have anywhere else to go, and are almost certainly the least successful at raising chicks to adulthood. Reproduction may also answer another question that follows these two wyverns, which is, why does rathian seemingly spend so much more time on the ground than rathalos? And the answer may actually be size. According to figures from the World Art Book at least, the largest rathian is at least partially larger than the largest rathalos. But length is a pretty poor measure of actual mass compared to, well, actual mass, or what...
Bro, this is to the guy talking. Bro, I love you. I appreciate your videos. This is awesome. But as someone who lives in America, I don't get the whole centimeter thing. So could you also add the feet thing to it? Because that would also be very appreciated. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't get taught the metric system. I get taught the royal system in America. Which is ironic, considering the fact you think it would be the other way around. But let's get back to the video.
As it may be called. Often animals that only look marginally larger can be much heavier. In birds of prey, males are actually smaller than the females, who guard the nest and feed the chicks as the male forages for the rest of the family. There are a number of reasons for this, mainly surrounding the fact that his smaller size makes him the far better flyer. It's also suggested that the female's greater bulk helps produce and protect unlaid eggs and incubate them once laid too, which would make sense. Whilst it's unlikely rathian literally sits on her clutch like a bird, but considering that she can canonically produce up to 10 eggs, that's a pretty significant energy cost to have to fly around with. The greater bulk of female birds also helps them defend the nest. Considering that canonically rathian will often defend their nests viciously, and the fated tail slap has been described to work on monsters up to the size of a basil juice, it seems there may be some truth in this. Plus, the greater mass of rathian, the far greater the impact of the hit with this particular move. This likely also explains the poisonous quills rathian is covered in that are absent in rathalos, which would be a pretty effective deterrent against monsters trying to bite and grapple with her. Whilst rathalos also does his share, if he isn't around all of the time, then the rathian needs to be bulky and powerful enough to defend herself. Whilst this might lead to selection for bigger females in general, any rathian who succeeds in getting her own rathalos effectively gets the deck reshuffled by whatever genes he may also possess. In real-life birds, there is also some dietary partitioning between males and females, but I don't see this happening in wyverns as it seems rathalos and rathian take the same prey base. But with that said, it's not just the kill, it's the finding of enough food, the pursuit and the transportation too. Rathalos may overall be more efficient as a forager due to his superior flight capabilities, and so is the better choice to provision the nest. On this note, let's explore some of the more combat and predatory-oriented aspects of the two. The analogue I had in mind for rathalos throughout the making of this video was one of the large open-country eagles, something like a golden, martial or wedge-tailed eagle. Looking at the various methods golden eagles use to hunt, I am indeed put in mind of the hunting behaviours seen by rathalos over the course of the series, especially the high soar with a glide attack method. This also allows rathalos to kill two birds with one stone, as he can patrol the lands from above, searching for both food and invaders. Considering this and the fiery breath, it's questionable as to why rathalos also needs venomous talons, and what venom may be used. It's possible this may be vestigial, and that it's more for young rathalos who are less experienced hunters and so are less likely to get a fatal first strike. In terms of what venom, if we break it down into the three main types of neurotoxin, hemotoxin and cytotoxin, of which myotoxins and necrotoxins would also fall under, we can rule out neurotoxin as this is responsible for paralysis like that exhibited by Gendrome or Great Gyros. Cytotoxins are primarily delivered in large quantities to begin digesting prey before the snake actually eats it, and for rathalos with his seemingly large and powerful jaws, I feel this would be quite redundant. Therefore, I'd suggest a hemotoxin, as this most likely seems to be beneficial, causing prey to not only bleed out quicker, but also giving a blood trail to follow escaped prey on. Much like that of a Komodo dragon, where prey capture is sped up via venom-induced blood loss, this behavioral flexibility of starting out with an eagle-like strike but falling back on Komodo dragon behavior if the initial attack wasn't fatal, would also make Rathalos a highly successful hunter. Rathian doesn't appear to use her venom to capture prey, and for some time it was believed that this was the chief evolutionary cause of venom. However, recent research into spitting cobras finds that their venom has evolved uniquely to cause as much pain as possible and has evolved directly as a specific anti-predator mechanism, not just as a bonus from prey capture. This seems quite analogous to Rathian, who primarily seems to use her venomous tail sweep in self-defense or that of her nest, which also seems to be the purpose of her quills as well. In cobras, this venom is a cytotoxin to inflame and degrade the tissues it comes across and works when sprayed in the eyes to the point of causing blindness. When against hunters, Rathian obviously just aims for any part of the body, but a cytotoxin would also fit with the degrading effects of Rathian venom that she actually manages to strike hunters with. When we consider how most terrestrial wyverns who would be attacking Rathian or her nest would likely be leading with their head, a painful strike to the eyes, nose or mouth may still have the potential to not only cause tremendous pain, but also possibly blindness, or great difficulty feeding that could ultimately be fatal. Onto Rathalos' title of King of the Skies, I do feel he deserves it. Yes, there are flying animals in the world of Monster Hunter more powerful than him, but these are pretty rare. Betelgeuse and the various elders live at far lower densities and so seem a lot less present in human cultures. There's a bit of a joke in the fandom that Rathalos always loses to everyone, but this is quite untrue. The only turf wars Rathalos loses is to Deviljho and Rajang. He ties with most of the monsters he fights and often gives a much better showing too, one could argue. He dodges most of Astalos' edgelord attacks in the opening of Generations in a fight that supposedly ends in a draw, seems overall tied in power with Seregios, and in the fight with Lagiacrus in the opening of Tri, it doesn't really happen. I'd also say in his actual turf wars, Rathalos performs very well. He cakes Anjanath's ass, negates Nagakuga's counterattack, whilst Nagakuga can't really do much to prevent Rathalos' initial assault, and the same with Zenogha too, who really quite sucks in his turf wars. I know these are technically draws, but in the same way sporting teams can tie with people generally acknowledging that one of the teams does better, I'd definitely say Rathalos gives a better showing. This isn't to demean...
I will say this though, the idea of a Rathalos and a Lagiacrus fighting, while that does sound cool, it probably would never happen because of the concept of, well, Rathalos is a smart carnivore that often at times will avoid a fight if necessary, and Lagiacrus is extremely powerful. In fact, in some books I've read that apparently the savage mighty Deviljho will look at a Lagiacrus and even think twice, which says a lot about both the Lagiacrus' power level and the Deviljho's own hunger. Because, like, I understand, like, he's starving all the time, either it be due to high metabolism or an ice age. More on that later in a future episode, I guess. But honestly, I think the fact that the Lagiacrus Rathalos turf war never actually did happen in the opening of Tri, forget the idea of the whole, battle between a Rathalos and another flying wyvern. That's the one I think we actually got deprived on. And with Lagiacrus coming this close in the world, it would only have made more sense to question whether or not they would have actually been able to do a good battle between those two. I mean, one's a Lord of the Oceans, the other's Lord of the Skies. So the idea of those two fighting would actually be kind of cool if you think about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's continue with the reaction.
In the other monsters, who could definitely take down a Rathalos, especially a grounded one, but more to defend Rathalos from the accusation of him constantly sucking. And as well, Rathalos is aggressive, apparently even by monster standards, seeing other large monsters in his territory as invaders to be repelled. Whilst most of the apex level monsters are also highly aggressive, considering the most fierce ones are often ones suffering from seasonal hormonal influxes or mutations, the fact Rathalos is almost up there with them is pretty impressive. The quest in the first game occurs because one nesting near Kotoko village literally wiped out a platoon as well. Rathalos is probably the most common powerful flying wyvern with the widest distribution in the old world, and you can't really be a true king in the minds of the people if you're only sighted once every 9 years. People living in Moga or Kotoko village have probably never seen an elder dragon or Betelgeuse, whereas Rathalos are resident in these areas and can probably even be seen from the village flying overhead on a clear day. From this, Rathalos likely has a much stronger cultural grounding in the native civilizations of the Old World, and this, with his still notable power, is likely what led to his title. Overall, with additional behaviors added in World, I feel Rathalos comes across as a cunning, capable, and powerful fighter who especially uses his aerial mobility to dominate land-based opponents. And if you're still unconvinced, then there's Silver Rathalos, who is apparently Elder Dragon tier. To move on to briefly discussing the various colours of Wraths, there's not much science you can really try to blag here, to be honest, other than maybe human cultures and blackguard hunters may well exaggerate the capabilities of unique animals, and that Silver Rathalos are pretty rare. But there's no real justification for a Silver Rathalos being more powerful. There's seemingly little advantage for a Rathalos to be silver as well, or indeed for a Rathian to be gold. So it seems these may just be genetic quirks that may even be disadvantageous.
My thought on the whole gold and silver one is that they have much more higher intake, like higher mineral intake. Cause like in World, you fight them in like areas where there's a lot of mineral density, like in the Elder's Recess and stuff. So maybe these monsters are animals that live in areas and feast upon other animals that have a higher mineral intake. Because you gotta remember, while there's not many mineral-eating monsters in there, there's still some, like Dodogama, which would obviously be an easy target for both a gold Rathian and a silver Rathalos. So an animal that eats high mineral intake, and then is preyed upon by another animal that eats that animal, it would make sense that they would have such a golden exterior to them. And considering to be the advantageous part, a gold Rathian would actually make much more sense in a desert environment than a pink Rathian in something. But with pink Rathian, I think maybe they were more of a creature that would live in the coral highlands due to more pink hues out there. Which leads to my own theory that pink Rathian actually originated from the New World, but as their numbers bolstered and stuff, they flew to the Old World, which is why we discover them there. It's a theory of mine, but it could be wrong, so it's up for speculation myself.
And ultimately explain the rarity. Far more common are Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian, which seem associated with volcanic areas and arid areas. These colours do a lot better at blending in, the blue with the dark volcanic rocks and the pink with the sands of the desert. It's better than being green at least. Whilst Rathalos's typical aerial attacks probably don't require much camouflage other than being counter-shaded, which he is anyway, this may still be more important when young, to avoid competitors and to rest in peace. In real-life leopards we see something similar. In the deep rainforests of certain parts of the Malay Peninsula, melanistic leopards significantly outnumber spotted ones. In such an environment, melanistic leopards have the advantage, and have become far more common due to such individuals being selected for in this population. It's also been suggested it helps them avoid tigers, which could give further support that Azure Rathalos's unique coloration is more to help reduce predation or competition.
That's kind of the same thing with jaguars in South America too, because it's more the melanism is more dominant in jaguars than it is in let's say leopards, because in their environment they're actually more diverse and numerous there. So it's an interesting concept which actually makes a lot of sense. Although I could also bolster the fact that maybe it's also a defense mechanism from other large predators out in the open. Because you sometimes find Azure Rathalos in the ancient forest. And considering its colors, imagine if an Astalos or something came flying over the monsters while it was young. You could look down and think, oh, it's just more sky or something. So it would kind of make sense in a way that if an adult Astalos would want to take out a younger Rathalos that was Azure, it would make sense that, oh, well, that's just more sky. But that's also another theory of mine.
Azure Rathalos may not be as overall prevalent as melanism in this population of leopards though for a few reasons. The leopard population mentioned is partially cut off and so has little incoming gene flow, whereas Rathalos can fly so gene flow isn't really a problem. Secondly, if Rathian can't nest in volcanic areas only near to them, then this will limit selection effects, as there won't be the same pressure to adapt to the environment if they're not truly resident there. It can also explain why Azure Rathalos are still seen more inland and why regular red Rathalos can still be occasionally be found in volcanoes. To discuss Dread King and Dread Queen individuals, the key thing that sets them apart is the incredibly distinctive patterns on the wings. Like many ornate structures in modern animals, like a lion's mane, a bird's plumage, or the coloration, these could show physical fitness and condition in the separate genders. When we look at various animal species, they can also show greater testosterone, lower parasite loads, stronger immune responses, and social dominance. So individuals known as Dread King and Queen may well just be the cream of the crop when it comes to rathalos and rathian, the strongest and fittest individuals of a population that would translate into them being the deadliest to hunt. With the science done, I also like to have a small bit at the end just to discuss the animals in question overall. And overall I really do like both rathalos and rathian, and think rathalos is a pretty good flagship for the overall series. Whilst relatively generic as dragons or wyverns, they both have quite a nice design, with elements of eagle being mixed into the overall wyvern, and the sexual dimorphism showed from the very beginning that Monster Hunter was a franchise that treated its beasts differently. I guess in hindsight I do wish they'd taken the dimorphism a bit further, and the differences in the fight in the initial games, but it's a bit late for that now really, and it was definitely changed as the franchise progressed. I also especially like Rathalos' implementation in World as well, where he really did feel like a top predator of the ancient forest, and with a lot of very natural feeling moves in his updated fight as well. I think all of the apexes in their respective environments got a pretty solid deal in base world. It's a pretty big step up too, considering what a complete and utter ball ache he was to fight prior to 3rd gen. Rathian on the other hand has always been a pretty decent fight, and one of my favourite monsters to train against in the series. I think the theme for both is great, even if they never got it properly tied to them like the other flagships, and Fatalis also partially stole Rathalos's. Some do complain that Rathalos has been in the series too much and they'd like a game without him, but overall I'm quite happy for him to stay, and to be honest I don't actually mind a lot of the monsters returning to beef out current rosters. So thanks for watching. This is a new series in which I'll be trying to use various fictitious beasts as conduits to provide what I hope are educative and interesting videos about the natural world. The main thrust of this will indeed be regarding Monster Hunter, but not all, and I have several other videos planned on other series and other monsters too. If you've enjoyed what you saw here today, please consider liking, subscribing and sharing it with others who may also enjoy it. It's hard to say how well this series may do, as there may well be some unpopular hot takes on popular monsters. Unlike other channels who consider everything canon and work up from that, some of the more unapologetically stupid and ridiculous aspects of monsters are definitely going to be taken apart. Some of the boys in later gens are not going to come off well at all. But with that said, certain aspects will be ignored. Rathalos would obviously never be able to fly in real life, but he was given large well-connected wings that are enough to suspend disbelief. So some aspects of physiology that the series wouldn't be able to work without, or exist purely for gameplay, will generally be ignored, or at least swept under the rug. But if there are things you'd like to learn more about, your own theories or questions you've always had about various monsters, or other franchises you'd like to suggest for me to look into, or even facts about real-life animals you think are applicable, don't hesitate to suggest them. This channel will only get stronger the more suggestions come in, because as one person doing it all, there is a lot that I can still miss. So once again, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time hopefully, and here's a teaser for the next video.
Well, I think we know that one. Well, this has been Power Bounce, and that was a really good video. How'd you guys like it? As you can see, this is the channel of the Unnatural History channel, and it's pretty cool, I will say that. So hopefully you guys will subscribe to them. I'll leave a link in the description below. And for my overall take on Rathalos and Rathian, they're pretty good. I like the concept of an idea where both female and male have different names but are considered the same animal. And while I never played the first ever Monster Hunter myself, my first introduction was in World, but I honestly do think that the idea of the female being a different monster than Rathalos, only until you realize what it is. Like, imagine this concept. I don't know if any of the first gen Monster Hunters actually had this, but when they first fight Rathian, it's like, wait, hold on, why is this a Rathalos? But it's green. Is this the final? Well, okay, let's fight it. And then next thing you know, you've watched the ecology, and it's like, oh, it's a female Rathalos. And then when you go into the future of the fight, it's like, so you're the male, and that was the female, and I just killed her. Well, I'm royally screwed, aren't I? I mean, it gives you a sense of, oh crap, I messed up, didn't I? And it would also tie into the concept of how vengeful some monsters can be. For instance, like in real world, tigers have been known to kill humans that hurt their mates and stuff. Like, they can be often petty and stuff like that, it's just like humans can. So it would make sense that an intelligent large wyvern like that would be like that. And as for how Power Bounce would use rathalos, I think it would be just sort of more of the supportive from the sky aerial support kind of thing. He wouldn't necessarily be a go-to battle form, due to him being just a apex among apexes. But I do honestly think that Rathalos himself is actually a pretty decent battle style when it comes to Power Bounce's forms. And considering how Power Bounce himself is often more of a land-based character, I think it would make sense that he would transform into more land-based carnivores himself. So again, thanks for watching. Leave a comment in the section below. Like if you did like the video if you did, and subscribe if you want to see me react to more of this guy's stuff. Again, this is my first reaction video, so if you heard anything, I apologize. I'm kind of new to this. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And a little sneak peek, I think it's going to talk about two of the Bloss Wyverns. So hopefully I'll be able to get that up. My name has been Power Bounce, signing off. Thanks for watching, and as always, may the wild be with you.